Hey everyone, welcome to East Park. Today I want to argue that South Park died and nobody held a funeral. The show still airs, new episodes still come out, but somewhere between a 7-year weed farm, a $900 million deal, and seasons shrinking from 14 episodes to 5, the South Park that mattered stopped existing. And the wildest part? The show agrees with me. In 2025, Stan Marsh looked at his friends and said South Park sucks now. When your own main character is making your argument for you, something has gone seriously wrong. So let me walk you through exactly how we got here, all of it, from the very beginning. But before we begin, I would just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It is completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we have managed to build. Anyway, that is enough, let us begin. The rise. How South Park became a cultural phenomenon, 1997 to 2000. Before South Park was a television show, before it was a billion-dollar deal, before it was any of the things we know it as today, it was a Christmas card, and not even a good one. In 1992, two college students at the University of Colorado named Trey Parker and Matt Stone made a short film called The Spirit of Christmas. They used construction paper, scissors, glue, and a beat-up old 8mm camera to put together a 4-minute animation about 4 foul-mouthed kids in a small Colorado town watching Jesus fight a snowman. It was crude, it was ugly, it was hilarious. They showed it at their school film screening in December of that year, and honestly, that probably should have been the end of it. Two guys goofing around in college. A funny little thing nobody would ever see again. But 3 years later, in 1995, a Fox network executive named Brian Graydon saw what Parker and Stone had made and liked it so much that he paid them $2,000 out of his own pocket to make a second version. This time it would be a video Christmas card that Graydon could send out to his friends in Hollywood. Parker and Stone made a new short, this one featuring Jesus fighting Santa Claus instead of a snowman. And the 4 kids now looked and sounded a lot more like the characters we would eventually come to know as Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny. Graydon sent copies of the video to about 80 of his friends. And then something happened that nobody expected. Those 80 people copied it and sent it to their friends. And those friends copied it and sent it to more people. And on it went. People were passing around VHS tapes of this thing at offices and parties all across Los Angeles. Eventually, someone put it on the internet, which in 1995 was still brand new to most people. The Spirit of Christmas became one of the very first viral videos in the history of the internet. This was years before YouTube even existed, years before social media. And here were two guys from Colorado with a construction paper cartoon that was spreading across the country like wildfire. Parker and Stone suddenly had meetings. MTV wanted to talk to them. Comedy Central wanted to talk to them. Parker was nervous that MTV would try to turn the concept into something for kids, which obviously would not have worked given the amount of swearing and violence in the short. Comedy Central, on the other hand, seemed to understand exactly what the show was. An executive at the network named Doug Herzog watched the short and immediately wanted to develop it into a full series. And so he did. On August 13th, 1997, the very first episode of South Park aired on Comedy Central. It was called Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. The episode was about aliens abducting Kyle's baby brother Ike, and Cartman refusing to believe that he had been probed by those same aliens, all while farting fire and being his usual stubborn self. It introduced us to Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny waiting at the bus stop. It gave us Chef singing in the cafeteria. It gave us Officer Barbrady being completely useless. And it gave us Kenny dying for the first time, prompting Stan to yell, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny!" and Kyle to respond, "You bastards!" for the very first time in what would become one of the most famous running gags in television history. The first episode pulled in a Nielsen rating of 1.3, which meant about 980,000 people watched it. For a cable show in 1997, that was considered pretty solid. But the buzz that followed was unlike anything Comedy Central had ever experienced. People started throwing viewing parties on college campuses across the country. Word spread fast. By the time the 8th episode aired just 3 months later, ratings and viewership had tripled. And by episode 10, titled Damien, the show had hit a 6.4 rating, which at the time was more than 10 times what the average cable show was pulling during prime time. To really understand how massive South Park was in those early years, you have to understand what Comedy Central was before the show. It was a small cable channel that most people did not even have access to. When South Park debuted in 1997, only about 9.1 million households had Comedy Central. By June of 1998, less than a year later, that number had jumped to 50 million. South Park did not just become a hit show, it literally transformed the entire network. Cable companies were scrambling to add Comedy Central to their packages because customers were demanding it, all because of 4 animated kids in a small mountain town. The ratings peak came with the second episode of season 2. Cartman's mom is Still a Dirty Slut aired on April 22, 1998, and it pulled in a staggering 6.2 million viewers with an 8.2 rating. At the time, this set a record as the highest-rated non-sports show in the entire history of basic cable television. During the spring of 1998, 8 out of the 10 highest-rated shows on all of basic cable were South Park episodes. Not Comedy Central, all of basic cable. This tiny little paper cutout cartoon about kids swearing in Colorado was dominating everything. The money followed. When South Park first started airing, the most Comedy Central had ever charged for a 30-second commercial was about $7,500. Within a year, advertisers were paying an average of $40,000 for the same 30 seconds during South Park. Some were paying as much as $80,000. The show had gone from a $2,000 Christmas card to the single most valuable property on cable television in less than 2 years. And then came the movie. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, hit theaters on June 30th, 1999. It was a full-length animated musical about the boys sneaking into an R-rated Terrence and Phillip movie, getting their mouths even dirtier than usual, and accidentally starting a war between the United States and Canada. It featured Satan and Saddam Hussein as lovers. It featured more swearing than almost any movie before it. And it also featured genuinely brilliant original songs that were so good, one of them, Blame Canada, earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song. A movie with a title that was itself a dirty joke got nominated for an Oscar. That is how good Parker and Stone were at this point. They could wrap sharp, smart commentary inside the most offensive packaging imaginable and somehow make it feel earned. But even as the show was breaking records and the movie was getting Oscar nods, things were already starting to shift. By the third season in 1999, the ratings began to drop. Parker and Stone themselves said this was not really a decline, but rather the initial hype dying down and the show settling into its true fan base. The massive wave of people who tuned in because South Park was the hot new thing started to move on. The viewers who stayed were the ones who actually loved the show for what it was. Seasons 2 and 3 still averaged strong numbers, but the days of being the single most talked about thing on all of television were fading. Season 4 arrived in the year 2000, and episode averages dropped to just above 1.5 million viewers, a huge fall from the 6 million plus peaks of Season 2. Though it should be noted that the Season 4 premiere still managed to pull in 22.1 million viewers because of the leftover excitement from the movie. That is a wild number. 22 million people tuning in for a cartoon on Comedy Central. But after that premiere, the numbers came back down to earth. The cultural explosion was cooling off. The t-shirts were not selling like they used to. The mass viewing parties were not happening as often. South Park was no longer the newest, most shocking thing in the world. But here is the thing. While the hype was fading, the show itself was actually getting better. Much, much better. Parker and Stone were maturing as writers, and the show was moving beyond pure shock value into something deeper, something sharper, something with real teeth. The crude paper cutout animation had been replaced by computer-generated animation that still looked like paper cutouts, and the stories were getting more ambitious. What happened between 1997 and 2000 was one of the wildest rides in television history. Two college kids with no money made a Christmas card that became one of the first viral videos ever. That Christmas card turned into a show that turned a barely known cable channel into a household name. That show broke every ratings record cable had at the time. It spawned a movie that got nominated for an Oscar. It changed what people thought was possible on television. It proved that animation was not just for kids and that smart commentary could live inside the most outrageous, offensive comedy imaginable. But the peak of the hype was already behind them. And what lay ahead, starting with Season 4, was something even more impressive than the explosion. It was the golden age, when South Park stopped being just a pop culture moment and became one of the greatest shows ever made. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that golden age, stretching from Season 4 all the way through Season 8, is where we need to go next. Because understanding what South Park was at its absolute best is the only way to understand just how far it eventually fell. Section 2, the Golden Age, Seasons 4 through 8. If you talk to any group of South Park fans long enough, eventually someone is going to bring up the Golden Age. And while people will argue about the exact seasons that belong in that conversation, there is a pretty strong agreement that the stretch from season 4 through season 8, running from the year 2000 to 2004, is when the show was at its absolute peak. This is the era that gave us the episodes people still talk about 20 years later. The episodes that sit at the top of every ranking list. The episodes that made South Park more than just a shocking cartoon and turned it into one of the greatest comedies in television history. To understand why this era worked so well, you first have to understand what the show looked like before it. Seasons 1 through 3 were wild and fun, but they were mostly built on shock value. The humor in those early seasons was all about how far Parker and Stone could push the line. A talking piece of poop named Mr. Hanky, Kenny dying every single episode, Cartman saying things no kid on television had ever been allowed to say. It was exciting and new, but if the show had stayed at that level forever, it probably would have burned out within a few years. The audience would have gotten used to the shock and moved on. But starting with season 4 in the year 2000, something changed. Parker and Stone started growing as writers. The shock value was still there, but now there were real stories underneath it. Real characters with real motivations, real points being made about the world. The episodes got smarter without losing the crudeness that made the show fun in the first place. Even Trey Parker himself has said that season 4 is around the time the show started getting better, when they moved beyond just trying to be offensive and started actually saying something. Season 4 introduced new characters that would become important parts of the show for years to come. Timmy Birch showed up for the first time in Timmy 2000, giving the writers a whole new personality to play with. The character dynamics started to deepen. Cartman was no longer just an annoying fat kid who said mean things. He was becoming something more complicated, more scheming, more dangerous. You could feel the writers starting to understand what they had with these characters and how far they could take them. And then season 5 arrived in 2001, and the show went to a completely different level. The 4th episode of that season was called Scott Tenorman Must Die. It aired on July 11th, 2001, and it is widely considered to be one of the greatest episodes of television ever made. Not just of South Park, but of anything. The plot starts simple enough. An older kid named Scott Tenorman tricks Cartman into buying his pubic hair for $16.12. Stan and Kyle explain to Cartman that you grow your own, you do not buy them, meaning Cartman got scammed. What follows is Cartman trying over and over again to get his money back, but Scott outsmarts him every single time. Scott burns the money right in front of Cartman's face. He publicly humiliates him by showing a video of Cartman begging for the money back while making pig noises. Kenny literally dies from laughing so hard at the video. This is the moment where Cartman snaps, and what he does next changed the character and the entire show forever. Cartman sets up an elaborate plan. He invites Scott to a chili cook-off. He deliberately tells Stan and Kyle a fake version of his revenge plan, knowing they will betray him and warn Scott. He writes a letter to Scott's favorite band, Radiohead, inviting them to come to South Park to meet a dying fan. And then, the real plan. Cartman tips off the local farmer, Mr. Dinkins, that dangerous pony thieves are in the area. When Scott sends his own parents to the farm to rescue what they think is an abandoned pony, Mr. Dinkins shoots and kills them both for trespassing. While the farmer is talking to the police, Cartman steals the bodies, chops them up, and cooks them into chili. He then feeds that chili to Scott Tenorman at the cook-off. When Cartman reveals what Scott has been eating, when Scott finds his own mother's finger in the bowl, when he starts crying and the members of Radiohead walk up and call him a crybaby without knowing what just happened, and when Cartman starts licking the tears off Scott's face, saying he is tasting the tears of unfathomable sadness, it is one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the history of the show. Stan and Kyle just stand there in horror and agree that they should never make Cartman that angry ever again. Parker and Stone have talked about how they debated whether it was okay to have Cartman do something that dark. They knew it would set a new bar for the character, but they went ahead with it, and it worked. Scott Tenorman Must Die was also the first episode of South Park to have just a single storyline with no side plots, something that Parker and Stone were nervous about at first. They were worried one story would not be enough to carry a full episode, but when they finished it, they realized that a single strong story worked even better than juggling 2 or 3 weaker ones. From that point on, many episodes would follow the same approach. That one episode turned Cartman from a bratty kid into one of the most memorable villains in all of television, and it set the tone for what the golden age would be. These were not just funny episodes. They were brilliantly written stories with real setups, real payoffs, and characters who felt like they had actual depth underneath all the toilet humor. Season 6 in 2002 kept the momentum going and actually did something that nobody expected. Kenny, who had been dying and coming back every single episode since the very beginning of the show, was killed off for real. He stayed dead for the entire season. This was not a gag. Kenny was actually gone. And instead of the show falling apart without one of its 4 main characters, it actually thrived. With Kenny out of the picture, other characters got more room to breathe. Most importantly, this was the season where Butters truly stepped into the spotlight. Butters had been around for a while as a background kid, but season 6 turned him into something special. He became the innocent, naive, good-hearted kid that the show desperately needed as a contrast to Cartman's growing darkness. His alter ego, Professor Chaos, was introduced this season. In episodes like The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers, where the boys go on a Lord of the Rings style adventure that gets derailed by an adult film, showed how the writers could take the simplest kid scenarios and blow them up into something absurdly funny without needing any political commentary at all. Season 7 came along in 2003 and kept the quality at an incredible level. This is the season that gave us Casa Bonita, one of the most beloved episodes in the entire history of the show. The plot is pure character comedy. Kyle is having his birthday at a Mexican restaurant called Casa Bonita, which is a real restaurant in Denver that Trey Parker and Matt Stone actually visited as kids. Kyle invites Stan, Kenny, and Butters, but not Cartman, because Cartman is always making fun of Kyle for being Jewish. When Cartman finds out he is not invited, he asks Kyle what it would take, and Kyle tells him that if Butters cannot go, Cartman can take his place. That is all Cartman needs to hear. He tricks Butters into believing that a giant meteor is about to hit Earth, locks him in a bomb shelter with food and water, and waits for Kyle's birthday party. But when Butters goes missing, the whole town panics. The party gets postponed. The police start searching everywhere, including bomb shelters, forcing Cartman to move Butters to an abandoned refrigerator at a gas station, which ends up at the city dump. Butters breaks out and thinks he is in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. He finds a stray dog and starts trying to rebuild civilization. Eventually, the truth comes out. The police come for Cartman just as the group arrives at Casa Bonita. Knowing he is about to be arrested, Cartman runs inside the restaurant and frantically tries to experience everything he can before the cops catch him. Cliff diving, sopapillas, all of it. When the police finally grab him and ask if it was all worth the trouble, Cartman simply says, "Totally." That one word is peak Cartman. Pure selfishness, zero remorse, and somehow you cannot help but laugh. Season 7 also gave us Christian Rock Hard, where Cartman starts a Christian rock band just to go platinum before Kyle, and Fat Butt and Pancake Head, where Cartman pretends his hand is Jennifer Lopez. These are episodes that have nothing to do with what was happening in the news that week. They are just stories about kids being kids in the most twisted, funniest way possible. And then came season 8 in 2004, which many fans and critics consider the single best season of the entire show. It holds a 97% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. This season was packed with episodes that became instant classics. Good Times with Weapons had the boys buying martial arts weapons at a flea market and imagining themselves as anime warriors. Awesome-O had Cartman dressing up as a robot to trick Butters, only for the plan to backfire spectacularly. Goobax brought in workers from the future and became one of the most watched episodes in the show's history, pulling in a viewership peak of 30 million. What made these seasons so special was the balance. The show was balancing crude humor with sharp writing. It was balancing stories about kids being kids with bigger social commentary. It was using its side characters like Butters, Randy, Craig, Tweek, and Jimmy in just the right amounts. Randy Marsh in particular was becoming a fan favorite during this stretch, but the key is that he was a supporting character. You loved seeing Randy because you only got small doses of him. He was the funny dad who showed up, did something ridiculous, and then the camera went back to the boys. That restraint is what made him work. The boys were always at the center. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, or Butters filling in for Kenny when needed, were the heart of the show. Every episode filtered the world through their eyes. The adults were idiots, the world made no sense, and 4 kids in a small mountain town were trying to figure it all out. That was the formula. That was the magic. And for 5 straight seasons, from 2000 to 2004, it worked better than almost any comedy on television. But nothing lasts forever. And as the show moved past season 8 and deeper into the mid-2000s, a slow and quiet shift began. The balance that made the golden age so perfect started tilting in a direction that would eventually change everything about what South Park was. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that shift, the one where South Park started caring more about the news than about its own characters, is exactly where we are headed next. Section 3. The Slow Shift. When South Park became a political commentary machine. Seasons 9 to 14. There is a moment in any long-running show where the thing that made it special starts to change. not all at once. Not in a way that everybody notices right away. It is more like a slow turn of the steering wheel. You look up one day and realize you are not on the same road anymore. For South Park, that slow turn started around season 9 in 2005 and continued steadily through season 14 in 2010. The show was still really good during these years. Some people would even say great, but something was different. The balance that made the golden age so perfect was starting to tip. The stories about kids being kids were fading into the background, and in their place, week after week, came stories about whatever was happening in the news. Now, South Park had always touched on current events here and there. Even in the early seasons, you would get the occasional episode about something going on in the real world. The season 4 episode Douche and Turd in 2004 made fun of the presidential election by framing every political choice as picking between two terrible options. But those episodes were the exception, not the rule. Most of the golden age was about the boys getting themselves into ridiculous situations that had nothing to do with the headlines. Cartman locking Butters in a bomb shelter to steal his spot at a birthday party, the boys playing World of Warcraft for so long they get fat and disgusting. These were stories born from character, not from CNN. Starting around season 9, the ratio began to flip. More and more episodes were direct responses to whatever was dominating the news cycle that particular week. And because of South Park's famous 6-day production schedule, where each episode is written, animated, and finished in a single week before it airs, they could be faster and more current than any other show on television. No other program could respond to a breaking news story and have a fully animated episode about it on the air within days. It was an incredible ability. But the more they leaned on it, the more the show started to feel like a weekly editorial cartoon instead of a comedy about 4 kids in Colorado. Season 9 in 2005 had one of the most talked about episodes in the show's history. Trapped in the Closet took aim at the Church of Scientology and Tom Cruise in one of the boldest moves the show had ever made. In the episode, Stan takes a personality test at a Scientology center and scores so high that the church believes he is the reincarnation of their founder, L. Ron Hubbard. Tom Cruise comes to visit, and when Stan insults his acting, Cruise literally locks himself in Stan's bedroom closet and refuses to come out. The joke writes itself. John Travolta shows up and also goes into the closet. So does the singer R. Kelly. Meanwhile, the episode lays out what Scientologists actually believe about an alien overlord named Xenu, with a caption on screen reading, "This is what Scientologists actually believe." It was fearless, it was brilliant, and the fallout was massive. Tom Cruise reportedly threatened to pull out of promoting Mission Impossible 3, which was a Paramount movie, and Paramount also owned Comedy Central, the network that aired South Park. A planned rerun of the episode was pulled from the schedule. Isaac Hayes, the legendary musician who voiced the character Chef, and who was himself a Scientologist, quit the show. Parker and Stone killed off Chef in the following season in an episode called The Return of Chef, and the Church of Scientology launched a secret investigation into Parker and Stone's personal lives, as revealed years later by a former church member. It was the kind of episode that only South Park could pull off. They went after one of the most powerful and litigious organizations on the planet and dared them to do something about it. Stan's final line in the episode was literally, "Go ahead, sue me." That took guts, and it was a reminder of what made South Park special. They were willing to say things that nobody else on television would say. But here is the thing about that kind of bravery. Once the audience and the creators both realize how powerful it feels to take on big, real-world targets, it becomes really tempting to keep doing it. And that is exactly what happened. Season 10 in 2006 gave us the 2-part Cartoon Wars episodes, which were about the controversy surrounding Danish newspaper cartoons that depicted the Prophet Muhammad. In the episodes, Family Guy is about to air an episode showing Muhammad, and the entire country panics. Cartman tries to get the show canceled, not because he cares about offending anyone, but because he hates Family Guy. Kyle fights for free speech and argues that the episode should air. Parker and Stone intended to actually show a simple, harmless image of Muhammad in the episode to make their point about censorship. Comedy Central refused to allow it. They put a black title card over the segment where Muhammad was supposed to appear. Parker and Stone were furious. They pointed out that a season 5 episode called Super Best Friends from back in 2001 had shown Muhammad without any censorship at all, and nobody had cared. But the world had changed. Fear of violent retaliation after the Danish cartoon controversy was real, and the network was not willing to take the risk. This was South Park at its most daring and its most important, fighting against censorship, calling out double standards, pointing out that they could show Jesus, Buddha, and every other religious figure doing ridiculous things, but could not show one particular figure because of the threat of violence. It was a genuinely significant cultural moment wrapped inside a cartoon about fart jokes. But it also marked a turning point in what the show had become. South Park was no longer primarily a comedy about kids. It was primarily a show about issues. And once that shift happened, it changed how episodes were built from the ground up. In the Golden Age, the writing process started with the characters. What would Cartman do? What would happen if Butters believed something ridiculous? The real-world stuff, if it showed up at all, was filtered through the lens of what these kids would experience. Starting around season 9 and getting more and more obvious through seasons 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, the process started to flip. Now, the starting point was the issue. What was in the news this week? What was everyone arguing about? And then the characters were plugged into whatever that topic happened to be. Season 12 in 2008 had About Last Night, an episode about Barack Obama winning the presidential election that aired the very night after the real election happened. Parker and Stone had written and animated the entire episode in the days leading up to the election, betting on an Obama win based on polling data. When Obama did win, the episode was already done and ready to air. In the episode, the town splits between liberals drunkenly celebrating in the streets and conservatives panicking like the world is ending, while the real twist reveals that Obama and John McCain were actually working together as jewel thieves all along. It was clever and funny and impressively fast. But think about what that episode is versus something like Casa Bonita. One is a story about a kid who will do literally anything to eat at a restaurant. The other is a reaction to a real-world event that happened the day before. Both are good, but they are completely different kinds of television. And the more South Park leaned toward the second kind, the more it moved away from what made the Golden Age feel timeless. This is the key problem with building your show around current events. The episodes that were about the news in 2006 or 2008 feel dated now. They require you to remember what was happening that particular week to fully appreciate them. Meanwhile, Scott Tenorman Must Die and Casa Bonita are just as funny today as they were 20 years ago, because they are about characters, not headlines. A kid locking another kid in a bomb shelter to go to a restaurant does not have an expiration date. An episode about the 2008 election does. South Park also developed a philosophy during this era that became both its trademark and eventually its biggest limitation. The show adopted a both sides are equally stupid approach to nearly every issue. Climate change? Both sides are dumb. Elections? Every choice is a douche versus a turd. Gun control? Both sides are overreacting. For a while, this felt refreshing. In a world where every other show and comedian was clearly picking a side, South Park stood in the middle and made fun of everyone equally. Parker and Stone called themselves equal opportunity offenders, and fans loved it. But as the years went on, that approach started to feel less like independence and more like a formula. No matter what the topic was, you could predict the conclusion before the episode even started. Both sides would be wrong. The truth would be somewhere in the middle, and Stan or Kyle would deliver a little speech at the end explaining what they had learned. Once you could see the pattern, it lost its power. It went from feeling like honest criticism to feeling like a default setting. There were still fantastic episodes during this stretch. Season 10 alone gave us Make Love, Not Warcraft, the World of Warcraft episode that won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, and is often ranked as the single best episode in the show's history. Blizzard Entertainment, the company that made World of Warcraft, actually helped with the animation for that episode, providing real game footage that was blended with the show's regular animation. The episode was about the boys spending weeks grinding low-level characters in the game to defeat one impossibly powerful player, getting so addicted that they become overweight, pale, and covered in acne. It was hilarious and deeply relatable to anyone who had ever played a video game for too long. And notably, it had nothing to do with the news. It was just a great story about the boys. But episodes like that were becoming rarer. The show was getting pulled more and more toward whatever was trending. Parker and Stone's ability to turn around an episode in 6 days, which had once been a production miracle, was now driving the creative direction of the entire show. They were not choosing topics because they had the best story idea. They were choosing topics because something happened on Monday and the episode had to be done by the following Monday. The ratings during this era tell an interesting story. Seasons 5 through 9 had consistently averaged about 3 million viewers per episode. Seasons 10 through 12 bumped that up to about 5 million, partly because the show was getting more attention for its controversial episodes and its ability to respond to the news so quickly. The season 14 premiere in 2010 pulled 3.7 million viewers, the highest rated premiere since all the way back in 1998. So commercially, the shift was working. People were tuning in because they wanted to see what South Park had to say about whatever was happening in the world. But there is a difference between people tuning in to see your take on the news and people tuning in because they love your characters and your world. The first kind of audience comes and goes depending on what is happening. The second kind sticks around forever. And without anyone realizing it at the time, South Park was slowly trading the second kind for the first. The show was still talented, still funny, still capable of brilliance, but something in its soul had changed. It was becoming more interested in being relevant than in being timeless. More interested in reacting to the world than in building its own. And as good as seasons 9 through 14 were, they planted the seeds of a much bigger problem that was coming. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because in season 15, Trey Parker would write an episode that many believe was a confession. A moment where, through his character Stan Marsh, he admitted out loud what he had been feeling for years. That everything, including South Park itself, was starting to look like crap. Section 4, You're Getting Old. Trey Parker and Matt Stone's cry for help. On June 8, 2011, South Park aired the 7th episode of its 15th season. It was called You're Getting Old, and when it was over, fans genuinely believed the show might be finished. Not canceled, not taken off the air by the network, but voluntarily ended by the two men who created it. Because what they had just watched did not feel like a regular episode of South Park. It felt like a goodbye. The episode starts simply enough. It is Stan Marsh's 10th birthday. Kyle gives him a CD from a band called Gersploosh that plays a type of music called tween wave. Stan's mom Sharon takes the CD away, saying the boys are not allowed to listen to it. Later that night, Stan's dad Randy sneaks the CD and listens to it. To the audience, the music sounds like drum beats mixed with the sounds of someone passing gas. Randy claims he likes it. The other parents in town play their own music, the Police's album Synchronicity as an example of what real music sounds like. But to the boys, the Police sounds exactly the same as the tween wave does to Randy. Each generation thinks the other's music is garbage. So far, this feels like a typical South Park setup. Generational differences played for laughs, nothing unusual. But then something shifts. Stan secretly listens to the tween wave CD that night and discovers that it now sounds like actual feces to him. Not the exaggerated fart sounds everyone else hears, literal garbage. He tells Kyle the next morning, confused about what is happening. Stan goes to see a doctor, who initially tells him that his musical tastes are simply changing as he grows up. That is normal. But during the examination, the problem gets worse. Stan starts seeing and hearing everything as crap, not just music. Movies, ice cream, video games. Everything that used to bring him joy now looks and sounds and tastes like human waste. The doctor gives him a diagnosis. Stan has become, in the doctor's words, a cynical asshole. This is where the episode stops being funny and starts being something else entirely. Stan's friends notice the change. He becomes a downer to be around. When the boys go to the movies together, Stan cannot enjoy anything. The trailers for upcoming films all look like garbage to him. He starts making comments about how everything is terrible. Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman get frustrated. They do not understand what is happening to their friend. They just know that he is ruining everything. After a fight at the movies, Kyle turns to Stan and starts yelling at him. But as Kyle is speaking, Stan watches his best friend's face slowly transform into a large talking pile of feces. Stan stares at it for a moment. Then he calmly turns around and walks away. Their friendship, the friendship that has been the emotional backbone of the entire show since the very first episode in 1997, appears to be over. Meanwhile, the episode has a second story running alongside Stan's. Randy Marsh, refusing to accept that he is getting older, starts performing tween wave music at the local bowling alley under the stage name Steamy Ray Vaughan. His act involves him literally soiling his pants on stage. Sharon is disgusted. She has been putting up with Randy's ridiculous behavior for years, through every obsession, every phase, every meltdown. But this time she has had enough. She sits Randy down and tells him that she is unhappy, that she has been unhappy for a long time. And in a moment that carries far more weight than most South Park scenes, she says that the same things keep happening over and over, every week, without anything ever really changing. That line hit fans like a truck, because she was not just talking about her marriage, she was talking about the show itself. Every week, something crazy happens in South Park. Every week, there is a lesson learned or a conflict resolved. And every week, everything resets back to normal as if nothing ever happened. Sharon was describing the formula of the show that had been running for 15 years, and she was saying out loud that it was making her miserable. The episode ends with no resolution. None. Stan's parents separate, Sharon packs up the house and moves Stan and his sister Shelly into a new apartment. Randy drives away in a moving truck, looking back one last time. Kyle comes across Stan sitting alone, but walks away without saying anything. Kyle and Cartman share a smile while playing video games together, already moving on. And Stan lies on his bed in his new room, completely alone, staring at the ceiling. All of this happens in a montage with no dialogue. The only sound is Fleetwood Mac's Landslide playing over the entire sequence. A song about change, about time passing, about looking back on who you used to be and realizing you cannot go back. The credits roll in complete silence. That was it. No joke at the end, no reset button, no lesson learned, just sadness. Fans immediately started asking whether Trey Parker and Matt Stone were trying to end the show. It certainly felt like it. Everything about the episode seemed to be a message. Stan seeing everything as crap felt like Parker saying that after 15 years of making South Park, the joy was gone. Sharon's speech about the same things happening every week felt like an admission that the formula had become a prison. The separation of Stan from his friends felt like Parker pulling away from the characters he had created. Even the choice of Landslide felt deliberate. Parker and Stone have said they cannot stand Stevie Nicks, and yet her song played over the ending without any of the crap sound effects that have been applied to every other piece of music in the episode. It was the one thing that sounded real. Parker and Stone appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart about a week later, on June 15th, 2011. Stewart asked them directly whether the show was over. They said no. They said they still enjoyed making it. Parker explained that while the episode dealt with some real feelings they were having, it was not a farewell. In the DVD commentary recorded later, Parker said, "Looking back at it, it kinda does look like we're kinda saying we don't want to do this anymore, but it's not really what we were saying. But even in that denial, there is an admission. It looks like that because it was coming from a real place." And here is where this gets really important for understanding what happened to South Park. Parker has described himself during this period as becoming an angry person. He and Stone had been making the show non-stop since 1997. 14 years of writing every single episode in 6 days. 14 years of staying up all night every week coming up with something new. 14 years of the same production cycle, the same characters, the same town, the same formula. Parker was in his early 40s by this point. He was no longer the 20-something college kid who had made a Christmas card out of construction paper. He was a middle-aged man with a family, looking at a show he had been making for more than half his life, and wondering how much longer he could keep going. Parker specifically said, in reference to "You're Getting Old," the question that was on his mind was, how long can you keep doing this? That is not the question of someone who is excited about their work. That is the question of someone who is exhausted. The show came back 5 months later in October 2011 with the episode Asperger's, which picked up right where You're Getting Old left off. Stan wakes up in his new apartment, still depressed, still seeing everything as garbage. He gets in trouble at school for his bad attitude. The school counselor, Mr. Mackey, tells him to snap out of it, which obviously does not help. Stan ends up being recruited by a group of men who also see the world as crap, and they reveal their secret. The way they cope is by drinking alcohol. Stan tries it, and suddenly the world looks normal again. Colors come back, music sounds good, things are funny. By the end of Asperger's, things more or less go back to normal on the surface. Stan's parents get back together, his friends come back, the town resets. But the episode does not end the way a normal South Park episode ends. In the final moments, after everything has been patched up, Stan sneaks a drink of whiskey from a flask. He is not cured. He has not learned a lesson. He has just found a way to numb the pain enough to keep going. The screen cuts to black and the episode ends. Parker and Stone have admitted that after writing You're Getting Old with such careful purpose and emotional weight, they had no idea how to follow it up. Parker described the first writers' meeting after the 5-month break as the team sitting around asking, "Now what the hell do we do?" They knew the show's world had to reset because that is how South Park works. But they also knew they could not just pretend the emotional honesty of You're Getting Old had never happened. So they split the difference. Everything went back to normal. But Stan's secret drinking made it clear that the normal was a lie. The happiness was forced. The cynicism was still there underneath, just being medicated. That is one of the most devastating things South Park has ever done. Not because of shock value, not because of offensive humor, but because it was honest in a way the show almost never allowed itself to be. Two men in their 40s used a cartoon character to say that the world had lost its color for them. That the thing they had built, the thing millions of people loved, felt like a burden. And that the only way to keep doing it was to numb themselves and push through. It is worth noting that Parker and Stone did not actually stop making the show after this. They kept going. They would make 10 more seasons and counting after You're Getting Old. But the episode stands as a marker, a line in the sand. Everything before it was South Park still figuring out what it wanted to be. Everything after it was South Park continuing on, even though its creators had openly admitted, through their own characters, that they were running on fumes. Fans still argue about whether You're Getting Old was a genuine cry for help or just a particularly ambitious episode, but the evidence leans heavily toward the former. Parker called himself an angry person during this period. Stone acknowledged that they were grappling with real feelings about the show. The episode was written as a direct parallel to their own lives, with Stan's cynicism standing in for their creative exhaustion, and Sharon's frustration standing in for the repetitive grind of the production cycle. These were not subtle hints. These were flashing warning signs. And yet, instead of stepping away, instead of taking a real break or ending the show on a powerful note, Parker and Stone kept making South Park. They signed new deals. They agreed to more seasons. They pushed forward. And when they came back, they did not return to the golden age formula of kids being kids. Instead, they tried something completely new. Something that would divide the fan base in ways that nothing before it ever had. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, because just 3 years after You're Getting Old, South Park would abandon the thing that had defined it for nearly 2 decades. The standalone episode, the weekly reset, the freedom to do whatever they wanted each week. They were about to go all in on something called serialization, and it would change the show forever. Section 5, the serialization experiment, seasons 18, 19, and 20. For 17 seasons, South Park worked the same way. Every episode was its own thing. You could watch any episode from any season in any order and it would make perfect sense. There was no homework required. You did not need to remember what happened last week because last week did not matter. Whatever chaos erupted in South Park on Wednesday night was cleaned up by the end of the episode, and by the following Wednesday, the town was back to normal, ready for something completely different. Kenny would die, then show up alive the next week with no explanation. Cartman would do something unforgivable, and by the next episode, everybody had forgotten about it. That was the deal. That was the formula. And for 17 years, it worked beautifully. Then came season 18 in 2014, and something changed. It started small. The first few episodes of season 18 had little threads that carried over from one episode to the next. Not full storylines, just small details. A joke from episode 1 would get referenced in episode 2. A consequence from episode 3 would show up in episode 4. It was loose, it was subtle, and honestly, it was kind of exciting. Fans noticed that things were connecting in ways they never had before, and it gave the season a feeling of freshness that the show had not had in years. The biggest storyline of that season was Randy Marsh being revealed as secretly living a double life as the pop singer Lorde. It was a running gag that built across multiple episodes and became one of the most popular bits of that entire year. Season 18 also ended with a 2-part finale called #rehash and #happy holograms that tried to bring together a bunch of the season's threads into one big conclusion. The episodes made fun of YouTube gaming culture and the entertainment industry's obsession with chasing clicks and likes instead of making anything meaningful. But the finale also showed the first cracks in this new approach. It tried to dig up jokes that had worked earlier in the season and reuse them, and the landing was not as clean as the setup had been. A parody of Michael Jackson that had been done much better in season 8's The Jeffersons fell flat when it was recycled here. Still, overall, season 18 was seen as a success. It proved that South Park could do something new without completely abandoning what made it work. And then Parker and Stone got ambitious. Season 19 in 2015 was the first fully serialized season of South Park. Every single episode connected to the one before it and the one after it. There was one big story being told across all 10 episodes, and if you missed one, you were lost. The central storyline revolved around a new character named PC Principal, a violent, aggressive fraternity bro who becomes the new principal of South Park Elementary and forces extreme political correctness on the entire town. At the same time, the town of South Park itself starts getting gentrified. A Whole Foods grocery store moves in, the neighborhood gets fancy. The old, weird, messy South Park starts getting cleaned up and made respectable. Parker and Stone told Vanity Fair that the serialization of season 19 was not actually planned from the start. Parker said they really fell into it, and that they had made a conscious decision to plan less than usual, which ironically led to more interconnected stories. The PC Principal storyline naturally bled into discussions about gentrification, which bled into commentary on advertising and corporate influence, which bled into a subplot about Mr. Garrison launching an over-the-top presidential campaign that was clearly a parody of Donald Trump. Each thread fed the next, and for most of the season, it felt like South Park was pulling off something genuinely impressive. Fans and critics were calling it a reinvention, a rejuvenation, proof that after nearly 20 years, the show could still surprise people, but the ending stumbled. The season finale, PC Principal Final Justice, tried to wrap up every single thread at once, and the result was messy. There was a plotline about sentient advertisements disguised as real people. There was Leslie, a girl at school who turned out to be a living ad. PC Principal had to physically fight her. Everyone was pointing guns at each other. It was chaotic in a way that felt less like clever storytelling and more like the writers trying to tie off loose ends they had created without knowing where they were going. The finale worked in some spots and completely fell apart in others, but most people were willing to forgive it because the season as a whole had been so entertaining. Then came season 20 in the fall of 2016, and this is where things went seriously wrong. Season 20 was the most ambitious thing Parker and Stone had ever attempted. It was fully serialized again, even more tightly than season 19, with every episode directly continuing the story from the week before. The season tackled a massive web of connected topics: internet trolling, online identity, the 2016 presidential election, gender relations, nostalgia culture, represented by a group of talking berries called member berries that made people feel good by reminding them of things they used to love. The berries would say things like, "Member Star Wars" and "Member when there weren't so many Mexicans," mixing innocent nostalgia with darker impulses underneath. The trolling storyline centered on Kyle's dad, Gerald Broflovsky, who was secretly posting hateful things online under the username SkankHunt42. This caused massive chaos at school and led to all the girls breaking up with all the boys because they assumed one of them was the troll. Cartman, in a bizarre twist, suddenly became a kind and sensitive person who started dating Heidi Turner and championing women's rights. It was clearly meant to be a shocking contrast to everything Cartman had ever been, and for a while, the mystery of why he was acting this way was genuinely interesting. But the season had a massive problem that nobody could have predicted. Parker and Stone had built the entire election storyline around the assumption that Hillary Clinton was going to win. Their stand-in for Donald Trump was Mr. Garrison, who had been turned into a Trump parody back in season 19. The plan for season 20 was for Garrison to win the election in the show and for the season to deal with the fallout. But they were writing this in real time, week by week, and they had structured their storylines around Clinton winning in real life, because almost every poll at the time said she would. On November 8th, 2016, Donald Trump won the presidential election, and Parker and Stone's plans for the rest of the season fell apart. The episode that aired the night after the election was called Oh Geez. It had been written with the expectation of a Clinton victory. When Trump won instead, the team had to scramble. They rewrote parts of the episode overnight. The result was an episode that felt disjointed and uncertain, because it was. The writers were just as shocked as the rest of the country, and they were trying to course correct a serialized storyline in real time with no backup plan. From that point on, season 20 struggled to find its footing. The memberberry subplot, which had been one of the most interesting ideas of the season, started to fade into the background. By the last few episodes, the berries had basically disappeared without any real payoff. The Caitlyn Jenner subplot, which had been a recurring presence throughout the season as Garrison's running mate, also got quietly dropped. The trolling storyline built toward a climax involving a Danish website called Troll Trace that would expose everything everyone had ever done online, but the resolution felt rushed and unsatisfying. The season finale was called The End of Serialization as We Know It. That title was not subtle. Parker and Stone were telling the audience directly that the serialization experiment was over. The episode tried to wrap up the Troll Trace storyline, the Cartman and Heidi relationship, the election aftermath, and the memberberries all at once. Critics were not kind. Jesse Schedeen from IGN gave it a 6.6 out of 10 and said there were a lot of plot threads left dangling. Jeremy Lambert from 411 Mania gave it it a 3 out of 10, calling it a disappointing end to a disappointing season with too many plot holes and not enough funny. Dan Caffrey from the AV Club gave it a C+ and said the show had felt unfocused for a few weeks now. The core problem was simple. South Park's greatest strength had always been its speed. The 6-day production cycle meant they could react to anything, but serialization requires planning. It requires knowing where you are going before you start. And Parker and Stone, by their own admission, do not plan. They have never planned. They start each week with a blank page and figure it out as they go. That approach works perfectly when each episode is self-contained. If this week's idea does not work, you just start fresh next week. But when every episode has to connect to the last one and set up the next one, flying by the seat of your pants is a recipe for disaster. And that is exactly what season 20 turned into. The serialization also exposed another problem. When every episode is standalone, a week episode is just a week episode. You shrug it off and wait for next week. But when every episode is part of one long story, a week episode drags down everything around it. The pacing of the whole season suffers. The jokes that do not land are not forgotten by next week. They are still there, hanging over the story, weighing it down. Season 20 had some genuinely great ideas buried inside it. The member berries were a brilliant concept about how nostalgia can be weaponized. Gerald as Skank Hunt 42 was a sharp commentary on how normal people become monsters behind a screen. But none of these ideas got the room they needed to breathe because they were all fighting for space inside a 10-episode story that had too many threads and not enough plan. Looking back, the serialization era from seasons 18 through 20 feels like a show trying to find a new identity after admitting it was bored with its old one. The standalone format that had served South Park for 17 years was getting stale, and Parker and Stone knew it. You're Getting Old had been the confession. Serialization was supposed to be the cure. And for a season and a half, it kind of worked. Season 18 was a fun experiment. Season 19 was exciting and fresh, even if the ending wobbled. But season 20 proved that the cure had its own side effects, and they were serious. Parker and Stone knew it too. The title of the season 20 finale was not just a joke, it was a promise. They were done with full serialization. They would move forward with a mix of standalone and connected episodes in future seasons. But the damage was already done in one very specific and very important way. Mr. Garrison was now the President of the United States. A joke that had started as a brief, funny bit in season 19 was now the permanent reality of the show, and it would stay that way for years. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because turning Mr. Garrison into Donald Trump was not just a creative choice, it was a trap. One that Parker and Stone built for themselves and could not escape from. And it would cost them one of their best characters for the better part of a decade. Section 6. The Garrison Problem. Writing themselves into a corner. Mr. Garrison is one of the oldest characters in South Park. He has been there since the very first episode in 1997, standing in front of a classroom with his hand puppet Mr. Hat, teaching the boys absolutely nothing useful while being one of the most unstable adults in the entire town. Over the years, Garrison went through more changes than almost any other character on the show. He came out as gay, he got a sex change operation and became Mrs. Garrison for several seasons. He transitioned back. He lost Mr. Hat and replaced him with Mr. Slave. He was fired from teaching. He came back to teaching. Through all of it, Garrison remained one of the show's most reliable sources of comedy because of how deeply unhinged he was underneath a thin layer of authority. He was the teacher who had no business being a teacher, the adult who was less mature than the children he was supposed to be educating, and in small doses scattered across episodes where the boys were still the main focus, he was absolutely hilarious. Then, in season 19, Parker and Stone turned him into Donald Trump, and everything fell apart. It started in 2015 as what seemed like a quick, funny bit. Trump had announced his presidential campaign in real life, and Parker and Stone needed a character in South Park to represent him. Rather than creating a brand new character or doing a direct caricature the way they had done with other politicians in the past, they chose Garrison. It made a certain kind of sense at the time. Garrison had always been loud, offensive, and completely unqualified for any position of real power. Making him the Trump stand-in felt like a natural extension of who the character already was. In season 19, Garrison launched his campaign by making outrageous statements, including graphic descriptions of what he would do to immigrants. He got an orange spray tan, he adopted Trump's mannerisms, and Caitlyn Jenner became his running mate, a parody of the vice presidential pick, playing the role of a distracted, incompetent partner who kept accidentally running people over with her car. For the 10 episodes of season 19, this worked fine. Garrison's campaign was a background storyline, one thread among several in the PC Principal season. It was not the main focus. The boys were still at the center of most episodes. Garrison's Trump impression was a supporting gag, and because it was used sparingly, it landed well. The season ended with Garrison's campaign still ongoing, but not yet resolved. It was a funny bit that seemed like it would get wrapped up whenever the show was ready to move on. But then came season 20 in the fall of 2016, and Parker and Stone made the decision to keep the Garrison as Trump storyline going as a major part of the new season. This was the fully serialized season, the one built around the election, internet trolling, and the member berries. Garrison was now running for president in the show at the same time that Trump was running for president in real life. And here is where the trap closed. Parker and Stone have said that they expected Hillary Clinton to win the 2016 election. Their plan for the show was built around that outcome. But on November 8th, 2016, Trump won. And because Garrison was the Trump stand-in on the show, Garrison also had to win. Suddenly, a character who was supposed to be a short-term parody was now the President of the United States within the world of South Park. And because the show tries to mirror real life when it comes to politics, Garrison had to stay president for as long as Trump was president in real life. This meant that from season 19 all the way through season 24, spanning from 2015 to 2021, Mr. Garrison was stuck in the role of president. That is 6 years. 6 years where one of the show's most versatile and beloved characters was locked into a single joke. He could not go back to being a teacher. He could not interact with the boys in the classroom. He could not be the weird, unpredictable Garrison that fans had loved for nearly 2 decades. He was just Trump now. Orange skin, bad hair, controversial statements, political scandals. Every appearance he made had to be filtered through the lens of whatever was happening with the real Trump administration that week. Parker and Stone were fully aware of the mistake. They acknowledged the creative misstep openly. The season 20 finale was literally titled "The End of Serialization as We Know It," which was partly about trying to close the door on storylines that had gotten out of control, but the Garrison problem could not be fixed by ending serialization. The character was the president. You cannot just ignore that. You cannot just have Garrison show up as a 4th grade teacher again next week without addressing the fact that he is supposed to be running the country. The serialization experiment could end, but the consequences of it were permanent. This created a ripple effect across the entire show. South Park had always been able to comment on politics in a way that felt separate from its core identity. The boys would hear about something political on the news, or the adults would get swept up in some political craze, and the show would make its jokes and move on. But with Garrison literally being the president, politics was no longer something that happened around the edges of the show. It was baked into the foundation. Every episode existed in a world where one of the main characters was the leader of the free world. That is not a background detail you can ignore, and this is where we get to the bigger issue. South Park had always prided itself on being different from every other show on television. While late-night hosts and Saturday Night Live and every other comedy program in America spent their time doing Trump jokes, South Park was supposed to be the counterculture alternative, the show that went against the grain, the show that surprised you. But with Garrison as president, South Park was doing exactly the same thing as everybody else. Every week it was another Trump joke, another political storyline, another episode where the real world was driving the comedy instead of the characters driving the comedy. Fans noticed, and they were not happy about it. The criticism that South Park had become too political started growing louder with each passing season. This was not a complaint that the show had never dealt with before. People had always pushed back on individual episodes that they felt went too far in one direction or another. But this was different. This was a sustained, years-long shift in what the show was about. South Park was no longer occasionally political. It was constantly political. And the Garrison situation was the single biggest reason why. Think about what the show lost by having Garrison trapped in the presidency. In the Golden Age, Garrison was a classroom character. He existed in the world of the boys. He was their teacher. His dysfunction was funny because it was happening in a space where children were supposed to be learning and growing. The contrast between his insanity and the innocence of a 4th grade classroom was what made him work. Take him out of that classroom and put him in the White House and you lose all of that. You lose the connection to the boys. You lose the everyday absurdity. You lose the thing that made the character special in the first place. It is the same problem that happens when any show takes a supporting character and tries to make them carry the weight of the main story. Garrison worked in doses. He worked as the crazy teacher you checked in on every few episodes. He did not work as the central political figure that the entire show revolved around for half a decade. The more screen time he got in the presidential role, the more one-dimensional he became. He was not Garrison anymore. He was just a vessel for Trump impressions. And here's what makes this even more frustrating. Parker and Stone knew this. They said as much through their own show. When season 28 aired in late 2025, the episode The Woman in the Hat featured Stan Marsh, who has always been Trey Parker's stand-in character, sitting with his friends and saying directly that South Park sucks now. And it's because it's all of this political shit. We're just getting totally bogged down in it. Remember when we used to do stuff? Just us guys? Ever since all this political crap took over, it's like, and he trails off in frustration. That was not just a fictional character talking. That was Trey Parker using Stan's mouth to say what he had been feeling for years. The fact that the creators themselves recognize the problem through their own characters makes it both better and worse. Better because it shows self-awareness. Worse because self-awareness without change is just complaining. Acknowledging that the show has become too political while continuing to make it too political is not a solution. It is just a confession that you are stuck. Parker and Stone were not the only ones who noticed. YouTube commentators who cover South Park started making detailed breakdowns of what had gone wrong with the show. Channels like Bloom's and Truff Stuff produced videos with titles about South Park's lazy satire and its decline in quality. These videos got significant attention within the South Park fan community and echoed what many longtime viewers had been feeling. The show that once defined counterculture comedy had become indistinguishable from every other piece of political commentary on television. There is an important comparison to make here. In the Golden Age, South Park went after targets that nobody else would touch. They exposed the inner workings of Scientology and Trapped in the Closet at a time when most of Hollywood was terrified of the church. They depicted the Prophet Muhammad in Super Best Friends in 2001 without flinching. They fought their own network over censorship in Cartoon Wars. These were moments where South Park stood alone, doing things that required genuine courage. Making fun of Trump in 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020 required no courage at all. Every comedian in America was doing it. Every late night show, every sketch comedy, every podcast. South Park was no longer the outsider throwing rocks at the establishment. It was part of the chorus. The Garrison problem was not just about one character being misused. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong with the show's creative direction. It represented the moment South Park stopped leading and started following. The moment it stopped being the show that surprised you and became the show that gave you exactly what everyone else was already giving you. And because the character was locked into the role for so long, there was no easy way out. You cannot undo 6 years of a character's identity with a snap of the fingers. When Trump left office in real life in early 2021, it created a window for the show to finally move Garrison out of the presidency and back towards something resembling his old self. But by then, the damage was done. An entire generation of newer South Park fans had only ever known Garrison as the Trump guy. The classroom dynamic that had made him so funny for nearly 2 decades was a distant memory. And the show itself had spent so long being defined by its political commentary that finding its way back to what it used to be felt almost impossible. But the Garrison problem was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Because right around the same time that Garrison was getting stuck in the White House, another character was about to hijack the show in a completely different way. And this time, it would not be about politics. It would be about marijuana. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because in season 22, Randy Marsh was about to move his entire family out of South Park and onto a weed farm. And he would not leave for almost 7 years. Section 7. Integrity Farms. The joke that refused to die. There's a rule in comedy that almost every comedian learns at some point. If a joke works, you do it once, maybe twice, and then you move on before the audience gets tired of it. The whole reason a joke is funny in the first place is because it catches you off guard. It surprises you. The second time you hear it, the surprise is a little less. The third time, it is barely there. And by the fourth, fifth, and sixth time, you are not laughing anymore. You are just waiting for it to be over. Every comedian knows this. Every comedy writer knows this. Trey Parker and Matt Stone definitely know this, because they built their entire careers on being unpredictable. And yet, Yet somehow they took a single joke about Randy Marsh growing weed and stretched it across 7 years and roughly 30 episodes of South Park. Tegrity Farms first appeared in Season 22, Episode 1, which aired on September 26, 2018. The episode was called A Boy and a Priest, but the Tegrity storyline properly launched in Episode 4 of that season, titled Tegrity Farms, which aired on October 17, 2018. The premise was straightforward. Randy Marsh, frustrated with the chaos and dysfunction of modern life in South Park, decides to uproot his entire family and move them to a marijuana farm outside of town. He names it Tegrity Farms, a play on the word integrity, because Randy believes that growing weed in the countryside represents a return to honest, simple, wholesome American values. The joke is that Randy has no integrity at all. He is selfish, delusional, and completely obsessed with his new business, and he drags Sharon, Stan, and Shelley along for the ride whether they want to go or not. In that first episode and across the rest of Season 22, the Tegrity Farms concept was funny. It was a solid Randy Marsh bit. Randy has always been at his best when he is getting way too invested in something stupid. We saw it when he became obsessed with cooking shows and creme fraiche. We saw it when he got addicted to the Food Network and started trying to become a celebrity chef. We saw it when he fought other dads at Little League baseball games in The Losing Edge. The pattern was always the same. Randy discovers something, becomes completely consumed by it, takes it way too far, and the comedy comes from watching a grown man spiral out of control over something ridiculous. It is a formula that works because Randy's obsessions were always temporary. He would go crazy about something for 1 episode, maybe 2, and then the show would move on to something else. Tegrity Farms broke that pattern. Instead of being a 1 or 2 episode gag, it became a permanent part of the show. Season 22 had multiple Tegrity episodes. Season 23, which aired in 2019, was even more heavily focused on Randy and the farm. The season premiere, Mexican Joker, aired on September 25, 2019, and while it dealt with immigration themes, Randy's storyline about trying to expand his weed business was a major thread. Throughout that season, Randy dealt with competition from other marijuana growers, tried to take his business to China, and became increasingly ruthless in protecting his brand. The China storyline, which played out in the episode Banned in China on October 2, 2019, became one of the most talked about episodes in years. Not because of Randy specifically, but because it took aim at Hollywood's relationship with Chinese. Censorship. The episode got South Park completely banned in China, with the show being scrubbed from Chinese streaming platforms and social media. Parker and Stone responded with a mock apology that said, "Like the NBA, we welcome the Chinese censors into our homes and into our hearts." That China episode showed that South Park could still generate the kind of cultural moments it used to be known for. But even within that successful episode, Randy and his farm were taking up a huge chunk of screen time. And that was the pattern going forward. Whenever Season 23 had a strong idea, Randy was there, pulling focus. The Tegrity Farm subplot was like a roommate who takes up too much space in the apartment. It was always there, always demanding attention, always pushing other storylines to the side. Then came 2020, and the world shut down. The COVID pandemic changed everything about how South Park was produced. Instead of their usual 10-episode seasons, Parker and Stone shifted to making standalone specials. The first was the Pandemic Special, which aired on September 30th, 2020. It was a full hour long, and the central storyline was about Randy discovering that he might have been responsible for creating COVID. The joke was that Randy had gone to China, done something unspeakable involving a bat and a pangolin while on a drug-fueled bender, and accidentally started the global pandemic. The entire special revolved around Randy trying to cover up his role in the outbreak while simultaneously trying to profit from it by selling a Tegrity Farm special called Pandemic Special Weed. The Pandemic Special pulled in 2.3 million viewers, making it one of the highest rated South Park episodes in years. But the strong rating masked the creative problem. Once again, Randy and his farm were at the absolute center of the show. The boys were there, dealing with the pandemic in their own way, trying to go back to school, dealing with the changes to their daily lives. But those storylines felt like they were playing second fiddle to whatever Randy was doing. A second Pandemic Special, South Park Q Vaccination Special, aired on March 10th, 2021. Again, Randy and Tegrity Farms were deeply woven into the plot. This time, the storyline involved the Tegrity Farms Vaccination Special, with Randy trying to get rich off the pandemic once again. There were also specials focused on streaming, with Post-COVID airing on November 25th, 2021, and Post-COVID The Return of COVID on December 16th, 2021 on Paramount+. These specials jumped forward in time and showed the boys as adults, which temporarily moved the spotlight away from Randy. But when the show returned to its regular format, the farm was still there, waiting. Season 25 aired in early 2022, running from February 2nd to March 16th. It was only 6 episodes long, which was already a significant reduction from the old standard of 14 episodes per season. Within those 6 episodes, Tegrity Farms remained the Marsh family's home base. The farm had become the new normal. It was no longer treated as a joke or a temporary situation. It was just where the family lived now. Stan went to school from the farm. Sharon existed on the farm. And Randy continued to run his weed business as if it were the most important thing in the world. Season 26 aired in early 2023. Again, only 6 episodes, from February 8th to March 15th. Tegrity Farms was still there. At this point, the farm had been a part of the show for 5 full years. 5 years of the same basic setup. Randy grows weed. Randy gets into trouble because of the weed. Randy's family is annoyed by the weed. Randy does not care because he loves the weed. The specifics change from episode to episode, but the foundation was exactly the same every single time. By season 27, which aired from October to December 2023, the Tegrity Farms era was approaching its 6th year. The season had several episodes that featured the farm prominently, and fan reactions online were increasingly frustrated. Reddit discussions about new episodes frequently included complaints about how long the Tegrity storyline had been going on. Comments like, "Can they please just end Tegrity Farms already?" and "I'm so tired of Randy's weed farm," became a regular feature of post-episode discussion threads. YouTube reviewers echoed similar sentiments. The joke had not just overstayed its welcome, it had moved in, redecorated, and refused to leave. The numbers tell part of the story too. South Park's ratings had been on a general downward trend for years, which is normal for any show that has been on the air for over 2 decades. But the show's cultural presence had also dimmed. During the Golden Age, a new South Park episode was an event. People talked about it at school, at work, online. By the mid-2000s, new episodes came and went with far less discussion. Part of that is because television itself had changed. There were more shows competing for attention than ever before. But part of it was also because South Park had become predictable, and the Tegrity Farms era was the single biggest symbol of that predictability. What makes the Tegrity situation so painful is that the original idea was not bad. Randy Marsh growing marijuana and thinking he is saving the world while actually being a selfish, oblivious disaster is a perfectly good South Park premise. If it had been a 3 or 4 episode arc within a single season, it would probably be remembered fondly. Maybe even as one of the better late-era storylines. The problem was never the idea. The problem was the commitment to the idea long after it had run out of fuel. 7 years is not a running joke. It is a crutch. It is what happens when a show does not know what else to do with itself and keeps going back to the one thing that got a reaction. And the Tegrity Farms problem was really just the most visible symptom of a deeper issue. Because the real question was not why the farm lasted so long. The real question was why Randy Marsh, a supporting character who was never meant to be the lead, had slowly taken over the entire show. How did a character who started out as Stan's embarrassing dad become the most important person in South Park? And what did the show lose by letting that happen? Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Because when you look at what South Park used to be and what it became during the Tegrity years, there is one change that stands above everything else. The boys stopped being the stars of their own show, and the man who replaced them was never supposed to carry that weight. Section 8. The Randy Marsh problem. When a supporting character hijacks the show. Every great television show has a balance. There are main characters and there are supporting characters, and the difference between the two is not just screen time, it is weight. Main characters carry the story. They are the ones the audience is supposed to care about the most, root for the most, follow the most closely. Supporting characters exist around them. They add flavor, they add comedy, they add conflict, but they are not supposed to be the reason you tune in every week. When that balance gets disrupted, when a supporting character starts getting more attention than the leads, the whole show starts to tilt. And once it tilts far enough, it is very hard to straighten it back out. South Park was always, from the very first episode, a show about 4 boys. Stan Marsh, Kyle Broflovsky, Eric Cartman, and Kenny McCormick. They were the center of everything. The world of South Park existed around them. The adults were there to be stupid and wrong while the boys tried to figure things out for themselves. That was the engine that drove the entire show. The comedy came from seeing the world through the eyes of these 4 kids who were just old enough to notice that the adults around them were insane, but too young to do anything about it. Every great South Park episode from the first 20 years of the show understood this. The boys were the lens. Everything else was scenery. Randy Marsh started out as scenery. In the earliest seasons, he barely existed as a character. He was Stan's dad. That was it. He showed up occasionally at town meetings or in the background of scenes at the Marsh house. He had no real personality beyond being a generic, slightly nerdy father. His job was a geologist, which came up once in a while but was never important. For the first 3 seasons of South Park, Randy was about as significant as any other background parent in the show. That started changing in season 6. The episode The New Terrence and Phillip Movie Trailer in 2002 featured Randy in a more prominent role, reacting to events with the kind of over-the-top emotion that would later become his trademark. But the real turning point came in season 9 with the episode The Losing Edge, which aired on April 6, 2005. In that episode, the boys are trying to lose their baseball games on purpose so they do not have to keep playing through the summer. Meanwhile, Randy becomes obsessed with fighting other dads at the Little League games. He trains for the fights, he takes them seriously, he gets into a massive brawl at the championship game. It was one of the funniest episodes of that entire season, and Randy was the reason why. From that point on, Parker and Stone started giving Randy more and more to do. And here is the thing, it worked. For a long time, it really worked. Randy became one of the best parts of the show because of how perfectly he represented a certain type of American dad. The guy who thinks he is smarter than he is. The guy who jumps on every trend and takes it too far. The guy who makes everything about himself while believing he is doing it for his family. Parker has said in multiple interviews that Randy is largely based on his own father, which is probably why the character feels so real even at his most ridiculous. Season 10 brought Make Love Not Warcraft in 2006, where Randy played a memorable supporting role. Season 11 had More Crap in 2007, where Randy becomes obsessed with breaking the record for the biggest bowel movement. It was crude and stupid and absolutely hilarious, and it won the Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program that year. Season 14 had Creme Fraiche in 2010, where Randy becomes addicted to the Food Network and tries to take over the school cafeteria as a gourmet chef. Season 14 also had Medicinal Fried Chicken, where Randy intentionally gives himself testicular cancer to get a medical marijuana card. Every single one of these episodes is beloved by fans, and every single one of them works because Randy is being used correctly. He is the B story. He is the supporting act. The boys are dealing with their own problems in the A story, and Randy is off in his own world being a lunatic. The two storylines run side by side, sometimes intersecting, sometimes not. And the balance between them is what makes the episodes feel complete. You get the heart and the perspective from the boys, and you get the absurd comedy from Randy. It is a formula that produced some of the best television South Park ever made. But somewhere along the way, the balance shifted, and it did not shift back. The numbers tell the story clearly. In the early seasons of South Park, the boys dominated screen time. Episodes revolved around their friendships, their conflicts, their adventures. The adults popped in and out, but starting around season 15 and accelerating through seasons 18, 19, and 20, Randy's screen time started climbing, while the boys' screen time started shrinking. By the time Tegrity Farms arrived in season 22, the takeover was complete. Randy was not just a major character anymore. He was the main character. Entire episodes were built around him. His storylines got the most attention, the most development, and the most screen time. The boys were still there, but they were increasingly pushed to the margins of their own show. Look at how the Marsh family dynamics changed to understand what happened. In the early seasons, Stan was the main Marsh. He was one of the 4 leads. His dad was a background figure. The relationship between them was simple. Stan was the kid trying to navigate the world. Randy was the clueless dad who occasionally made things harder. That dynamic worked because the camera stayed on Stan. We saw Randy through Stan's eyes, and what we saw was funny because it was filtered through the perspective of a kid who could not believe how dumb his dad was. Tegrity Farms flipped that completely. Suddenly, the Marsh family storylines were about Randy. His dreams, his business, his conflicts, his ego. Stan was reduced to the role of the annoyed son who did not want to be living on a weed farm. Sharon became the frustrated wife who could not get through to her husband. Shelly practically disappeared. The entire family existed to orbit around Randy. And because the farm was physically removed from the town of South Park, it also meant that the Marsh family was separated from the rest of the cast. Stan was no longer hanging out at the bus stop with Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny the way he used to. He was stuck on a farm with his dad, playing a supporting role in what had become the Randy Marsh Show. This separation had a devastating effect on the core four dynamic. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny together was the heart of South Park. Their friendship, their arguments, their adventures, their four-way chemistry was what made the show special. When Stan is stuck on a farm and Kyle is in town and Cartman is doing his own thing and Kenny is barely in the episode at all, that core dynamic disappears. And without it, South Park does not feel like South Park. It feels like a different show wearing a South Park costume. Fans have been vocal about this. Online discussions about late-era South Park almost always include some version of the same complaint. Too much Randy, not enough of the boys. Reddit threads about new episodes routinely feature comments expressing frustration that the show has moved away from the four kids who made it famous. The sentiment is not that Randy is a bad character. Almost everyone agrees that Randy is great in the right doses. The problem is that the doses stopped being right a long time ago. It is the difference between loving a certain food and being forced to eat it for every single meal for 7 years. There is a creative explanation for why this happened, and it is not complicated. Trey Parker has said that as he has gotten older, he relates more to the adult characters than the kid characters. He was in his late 20s when South Park started. The boys were roughly his generation's inner children. But by the time Tegrity Farms rolled around, Parker was approaching 50. He was a father himself. The idea of writing stories about fourth graders dealing with playground drama was less interesting to him than writing stories about a middle-aged man dealing with middle-aged problems. And since Parker is the primary creative force behind the show, writing almost every episode himself, the show naturally drifted toward whatever interested him most. That is understandable on a human level. Of course a writer is going to gravitate toward characters and situations that reflect their own life, but it does not change the fact that the audience fell in love with a show about four kids. And what they got instead was a show about a middle-aged man growing marijuana. The emotional contract between the show and its viewers was broken. Not maliciously, not intentionally, but broken all the same. The golden age Randy would show up, steal a few scenes, make you laugh harder than anyone else in the episode, and then the camera would go back to the boys. That version of Randy was perfect. He was the dessert, not the main course. Late era Randy is the main course, the appetizer, the dessert, and the after dinner drinks. There is no break from him. There is no contrast. And without contrast, even the funniest character in the world becomes exhausting. This is not just a matter of opinion. You can see it in how the show's most beloved episodes are distributed. Ask any South Park fan to list their 10 favorite episodes, and the vast majority of those lists will be dominated by episodes from the first 15 seasons where the boys are front and center. Scott Tenorman Must Die, Casa Bonita, Make Love Not Warcraft, Good Times with Weapons, The Return of the Fellowship of the Ring to the Two Towers. These are all episodes where the boys are driving the story and the adults are in supporting roles. The formula worked. It was not broken. But Parker and Stone changed it anyway. And the thing they changed it to was Randy, all the time. The frustrating part is that every now and then a late era episode would come along where the boys were back at the center, and it would feel like a breath of fresh air, like the show remembering what it was supposed to be. Those episodes would generate more positive buzz online than the Randy heavy ones almost every single time. The audience was telling the creators, loudly and clearly, what they wanted. More of the boys, less of Randy. But the message never seemed to land, because the next week, Randy would be right back at the center of things, running his farm, chasing his latest scheme, taking up all the oxygen in the room. The Randy Marsh problem and the Tegrity Farms problem are really the same problem looked at from two different angles. One is about a character, the other is about a setting, but both are about the same thing. South Park lost its center. It stopped being the show it was built to be and became something else. Something that might still be funny in individual moments, but that no longer had the structural foundation that made it great. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And while the show was losing its creative identity one episode at a time, something was happening behind the scenes that would change South Park in a completely different way. Because in 2021, Parker and Stone signed a deal worth over $900 million, and the price of that deal was splitting the show in half. Section 9, the $900 million deal, splitting South Park in half. On August 5th, 2021, Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a deal with Viacom-CBS, the parent company of Paramount Plus and Comedy Central, that was worth over $900 million. When the news broke, it became one of the biggest entertainment stories of the year. $900 million for South Park, for a cartoon about four foul-mouthed kids in a small Colorado town. The number was so large that it was hard to even wrap your head around it. To put it in perspective, that deal was worth more than what Disney paid to buy the entire Star Wars franchise from George Lucas in 2012, which was $4 billion for a property that had been generating revenue for nearly 4 decades across movies, toys, theme parks, and merchandise. South Park's deal was nearly a quarter of that for a single animated show. It was, at the time, one of the largest deals in television history for individual creators. The details of the deal were reported by Bloomberg, The Hollywood Reporter, and several other outlets. The agreement covered the continuation of South Park on Comedy Central through season 30, meaning the show was guaranteed to keep airing at least through 2027. But the bigger piece of the deal involved Paramount Plus, the streaming service that Viacom CBS was trying to build into a competitor against Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, and the other major platforms that were fighting for subscribers in the day. Streaming wars. Under the terms of the agreement, Parker & Stone would produce 14 made-for-streaming movies exclusively for Paramount Plus. These were described as South Park events, or movies, that would live only on the streaming platform and would not air on Comedy Central. The reason Viacom CBS was willing to pay that kind of money was simple. They needed content for Paramount Plus. In 2021, the streaming wars were at their peak. Every major entertainment company was pouring billions of dollars into their streaming platforms, trying to attract and retain subscribers. Netflix had a massive head start. Disney Plus had launched in late 2019 and was growing rapidly thanks to Marvel, Star Wars, and Pixar content. HBO Max had prestige dramas and blockbuster movies. Paramount Plus was struggling to compete. It did not have the same depth of must-watch content that its rivals did. South Park was one of the most recognizable brands in Viacom CBS's entire library, and Parker & Stone were the kind of proven creators that could drive subscriptions. The deal made business sense for Viacom CBS. They were buying a guaranteed audience. For Parker & Stone, the deal was obviously life-changing money, even for two guys who were already very wealthy. But it came with strings attached that would fundamentally change how South Park content was created and distributed. Before the deal, South Park existed in one place. It aired on Comedy Central on Wednesday nights, and fans knew exactly where to find it. After the deal, South Park content was split between 2 platforms. The regular show still aired on Comedy Central, but the streaming movies were exclusive to Paramount Plus. If you wanted to see all of the South Park content being produced, you now needed access to both a cable channel and a separate streaming subscription. The first 2 Paramount Plus movies, or specials as they were often called, arrived relatively quickly. Post-COVID premiered on Paramount Plus on November 25th, 2021. It was set decades in the future, showing the boys as middle-aged adults in a world that had been permanently changed by the COVID pandemic. Stan was a whiskey-drinking consultant living alone, Kyle was a therapist, Cartman had converted to Judaism, was married to a Jewish woman named Yentl, and had 3 kids. Kenny was dead, though the mystery of how he died was a central plot point. Butters had become a hedge fund manager named Victor Chaos. The special was well received by fans because it did something the show had not done in a long time. It focused on the boys. Yes, they were grown up, but the core 4 dynamic was back at the center of the story, and people responded to that. The follow-up, Post-COVID, The Return of COVID, arrived on December 16th, 2021. It continued the story with the adult versions of the characters trying to travel back in time to prevent the pandemic from ever happening. It resolved with a happier timeline where the boys got to grow up in a better world. Both specials were praised for their emotional depth and for feeling like South Park at its best. But then the quality and reception became inconsistent. The Streaming Wars premiered on June 1st, 2022, and The Streaming Wars Part 2 followed on July 13th, 2022. These specials focused on water rights in South Park and made fun of the streaming industry. Randy Marsh was once again a central figure, fighting over water access for Tegrity Farms. The specials received mixed reviews. They felt less focused than the post-COVID specials and more like extended regular episodes than true movies. The novelty of the streaming movie format was already starting to wear off, and this is where the fracturing of the South Park experience started to become a real problem. Before the Paramount Plus deal, being a South Park fan was simple. You watched the show on Comedy Central, or you caught up later on Hulu or HBO Max, which had licensing deals for the show's back catalog. After the deal, the situation got complicated. The regular seasons were on Comedy Central, The streaming specials were on Paramount+. The older seasons had their licensing deals shifted around as well. At various points, different chunks of the South Park library were available on different platforms, and figuring out where to watch what became a chore. This fragmentation mattered because it divided the fan base. Not everyone who watched South Park on Comedy Central was going to subscribe to Paramount+ just for the streaming specials, and not everyone on Paramount+ was keeping up with the regular seasons on Comedy Central. The result was that any given piece of South Park content was being seen by a smaller audience than it would have been if everything had lived in one place. The communal experience of South Park, the idea that everyone was watching the same thing at the same time and talking about it the next day, was weakened. When a new streaming special dropped on Paramount+, some fans watched it right away, some waited, some never saw it at all. The shared conversation that had once made South Park a cultural event was getting harder to maintain. There was also the question of creative energy. Parker and Stone were now committed to producing both regular seasons and streaming movies. That is a massive amount of content. Even for two guys who had been making South Park for over 2 decades, the workload of maintaining a regular television season while also producing feature-length streaming specials was enormous. Something had to give, and what gave was the length of the regular seasons. Before the deal, South Park seasons were typically 14 episodes long. Some later seasons had been shortened to 10 episodes. But after the Paramount+ deal, the regular seasons shrank even further. Season 25, which aired in early 2022, was only 6 episodes. Season 26 in early 2023 was 6 episodes. Season 27 in late 2023 was 6 episodes. The show that used to give fans 14 episodes a year was now giving them 6, and the specials on Paramount+ were expected to make up the difference. But specials and regular episodes are not the same thing. They have different pacing, different structures, different expectations. A 6-episode season of South Park does not feel like a full season. It feels like half of one. And being told that the other half is on a different platform behind a different paywall does not make fans feel like they are getting more South Park. It makes them feel like they are getting less. The deal also raised a deeper question about what South Park was even for anymore. In the beginning, South Park existed because Parker and Stone had something to say, and Comedy Central gave them a platform to say it. The show was driven by creative energy, by anger, by the desire to make people laugh and make people think, and occasionally make people furious. The $900 million deal reframed the relationship. South Park was no longer just a creative project. It was a content pipeline, a subscription driver, a piece of corporate strategy designed to prop up a struggling streaming service. That does not mean Parker and Stone stopped caring about the show, but it does mean that the context around the show changed in a way that inevitably affected how it was perceived. When you know that a show exists partly to drive subscriptions to a streaming platform, it changes how you watch it. It changes how you think about it. The punk rock energy that South Park was built on, the feeling that these two guys from Colorado were making exactly the show they wanted to make with no regard for corporate interests, was harder to maintain when the show was the centerpiece of a nearly billion-dollar corporate deal. Parker and Stone had always operated with an unusual amount of creative freedom. That freedom was a huge part of what made South Park feel special. But freedom and a $900 million contract exist in tension with each other, even if nobody involved admits it publicly. And the deal also had another effect that was less obvious but just as important. It locked the show into the future. South Park was now contractually obligated to continue through at least season 30. Parker and Stone could not walk away even if they wanted to. The show that had once continued because its creators had more to say was now continuing because a contract said it had to. You're Getting Old in 2011 had been about creators who were tired and wondering if they should stop. The Paramount Plus deal made stopping impossible. Whatever creative fatigue Parker and Stone were feeling, whatever doubts they had about the show's direction, they were now committed to years more of content. That is not to say the deal was all bad. The financial security it provided was enormous. The post-COVID specials proved that the streaming format could produce great South Park content when the creative vision was strong. And the guarantee of the show continuing through season 30 meant that fans would have South Park for years to come, which for people who grew up with the show was genuinely exciting news. But the cost of the deal was real. The fan base was fragmented. The regular seasons were cut in half, the creative energy was spread thinner, and the show was now operating under a set of corporate obligations that it had never had before. South Park had survived network censorship battles, advertiser boycotts, and cultural controversies without blinking, but the Paramount Plus deal changed the game in a way that those earlier battles never did. It did not threaten the show from the outside. It changed the show from the inside. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the most visible change was the one that fans felt every single year. Because somewhere along the way, a full season of South Park stopped meaning 14 episodes. Then it stopped meaning 10. And eventually, 6 episodes became the new normal. What that meant for the show and for the fans who had been watching it for decades is its own story entirely. Section 10. The incredible shrinking season, when 6 episodes became enough. There was a time when South Park gave you so much content that you almost took it for granted. In the early years, a single season could have as many as 17 episodes. Season 1 in 1997 had 13. Season 2 in 1998 jumped to 18, which is still the most episodes South Park has ever produced in a single year. By season 4 in 2000, the show had settled into a rhythm of roughly 14 episodes per season, split across 2 runs. There would be a batch of episodes in the spring and another batch in the fall. And between the two, you were getting 14 fresh episodes a year, sometimes more. That was the standard for over a decade. From season 4 through season 17, which covers the years 2000 to 2013, South Park delivered 14 episodes almost every single year. A few seasons bumped up to 17 or 18, but 14 was the baseline. The minimum that fans expected and the minimum that Parker and Stone delivered. Think about what 14 episodes meant for the show. It meant there was room to experiment, room to fail, room to try something weird one week and do something completely different the next. If one episode did not work, there were 13 others that might. Parker and Stone could dedicate an episode to a massive political statement, then follow it up with a stupid, silly story about the boys doing something ridiculous with no larger point at all. The variety was what kept the show fresh. Any given season might have an all-time classic sitting right next to a forgettable episode. And that was fine. Nobody expected every single episode to be perfect. The sheer volume of content meant there was always something for everyone. Now compare that to what South Park has become. Season 25 in early 2022 had 6 episodes. Season 26 in early 2023 had 6 episodes. Season 27 in late 2023 had 6 episodes. Season 28 in late 2025 had 6 episodes. The show that once gave fans 14 to 18 episodes per year now gives them 6. That is not a small reduction. That is a cut of more than half. If the old South Park was a full meal, the new South Park is a snack. And telling fans that the streaming specials on Paramount Plus make up the difference does not change the fact that what airs on Comedy Central, the thing that most people think of when they think of South Park, has been reduced to something that barely qualifies as a season at all. 6 episodes is not enough time to do what South Park used to do. In a 14-episode season, you could have 5 or 6 truly great episodes, a few solid ones, a couple of experimental ones, and maybe 1 or 2 that missed the mark. That distribution is what made the show feel alive. There was room for the highs and the lows and everything in between. In a 6-episode season, there is no room for anything. Every episode has to count. Every episode has to land. And when one of those 6 episodes is a dud, it does not feel like a minor hiccup in a full season. It feels like a significant chunk of the entire year's output was wasted. This is not just a theoretical problem. Look at how it plays out in practice. Season 26 had 6 episodes. If 2 of those episodes were heavily focused on Randy Integrity Farms, and you are a fan who is tired of those storylines, you just lost a third of the entire season. In a 14-episode season, 2 Randy-heavy episodes are a minor annoyance. You sit through them and wait for the next one. In a 6-episode season, they represent 33% of everything you are going to get that year. The margin for error disappears completely when you only have 6 chances. The shortened seasons also changed the pacing of the show's year. In the old days, South Park was a near constant presence. With episodes airing across spring and fall runs, the show was on the air for significant stretches of the calendar year. There was always a new episode coming soon, or one that had just aired. South Park was part of the weekly routine for millions of people. Now, a 6-episode season airs across 6 consecutive weeks, and then it is gone. 6 weeks of South Park followed by months of nothing. The show pops up for a month and a half and then vanishes again. That is not enough time to build momentum. It is not enough time to generate the kind of sustained cultural conversation that South Park used to create. By the time people start talking about the new season, it is already almost over. The production reason for the shorter seasons is directly tied to the Paramount Plus deal. Parker and Stone's creative energy and time are now split between producing regular seasons for Comedy Central and producing streaming specials and movies for Paramount Plus. There are only so many hours in a day and only so many weeks in a year, and making South Park is an incredibly demanding process even under the best circumstances. The 6-day production cycle that the show is famous for is brutal. Each episode is written, voiced, animated, and completed in less than a week. Doing that 14 times in a row is exhausting. Doing it 6 times while also working on streaming specials is a different kind of challenge, but it still means the regular season had to shrink to make room for the other commitments. Parker and Stone have not said a great deal publicly about why the seasons got shorter, but the timeline speaks for itself. The first season to drop below 10 episodes was season 24 in 2021, which was disrupted by the pandemic and only had 2 proper episodes alongside the specials. Season 25 in 2022 was the first post-deal season to establish 6 episodes as the new standard, and it has stayed there ever since. Whatever conversation happened behind the scenes about how many episodes each season would have, the result was clear. 6 was the number, and there was no going back. The shorter seasons hit differently depending on what kind of South Park fan you are. If you are someone who has been watching since the late 90s, you remember what a full season felt like. You remember the anticipation of a 14-episode run. You remember having enough content to really sink your teeth into. For those fans, 6 episodes feels like a broken promise. Not officially. Nobody was promised 14 episodes forever. But emotionally, there is a sense that something has been taken away. The show you grew up with used to give you so much more than it gives you now. For newer fans, the shorter seasons might not feel as jarring because they do not have the same point of comparison. If you started watching South Park in 2022, 6 episodes per season is just what the show is. You have no memory of 14-episode seasons or spring and fall runs. Your version of South Park has always been a brief burst of episodes that comes and goes quickly. But even for newer fans, 6 episodes is hard to get excited about. In an era where streaming shows routinely have 8 to 10 episodes per season, and some cable shows still do more, 6 feels light by any standard. The impact on storytelling is significant too. One of the things that made the golden age of South Park so great was the variety within each season. A single season could cover an enormous range of topics, tones, and styles. You might get a dark Cartman episode followed by a Sweet Butters episode, followed by a political satire, followed by a completely absurd adventure. The tonal range was part of what made the show special. Every week was a surprise. You genuinely did not know what kind of episode you were going to get, and that unpredictability was exciting. With 6 episodes, that variety is nearly impossible to achieve. There simply are not enough episodes to cover a wide range of tones and topics. The season has to pick a few things to focus on and commit to them, which means large parts of the South Park universe go untouched for an entire year. Characters who used to get spotlight episodes regularly now go entire seasons without a meaningful appearance. Butters, who became one of the most popular characters on the show during the Golden Age, gets far less screen time than he used to. Kenny, who was always used sparingly, is now practically invisible in some seasons. Jimmy, Timmy, Craig, Tweek, and the rest of the supporting cast of kids rarely get their own episodes anymore. There is simply not enough room. And here's the thing that ties the shortened seasons to everything else that has gone wrong. When you only have 6 episodes, you cannot afford to waste any of them. But the show keeps spending its limited episodes on the same things that fans have been complaining about for years. Randy-heavy storylines, political commentary, Integrity Farms. When you had 14 episodes, dedicating 3 or 4 of them to those things was fine because there were still 10 other episodes that could focus on different characters and stories. When you have 6 episodes and 3 of them are Randy on the farm, that is half the season. The shorter season did not create the Randy problem or the politics problem, but it magnified them enormously because there was no longer any buffer. Every creative choice felt twice as significant because there were half as many episodes to spread them across. The math is brutal and simple. In 2004, during season 8, South Park produced 14 episodes. In 2023, during season 27, South Park produced 6. That that is a 57% reduction in yearly output for the regular show. Even if you add the streaming specials into the count, the total amount of South Park content being produced each year is still less than what it used to be. And the content that does exist is scattered across different platforms, making it harder for any single piece to have the same impact that a Wednesday night episode on Comedy Central used to have. There is also a psychological effect that comes with shorter seasons. When a show gives you 14 episodes, there is a sense of abundance, of generosity. The creators are giving you a lot, and even if not all of it is perfect, the volume itself communicates a kind of commitment. When a show gives you 6 episodes, the feeling is the opposite. It feels cautious, careful, measured, like the creators are rationing their output. And for South Park, a show that was built on excess and recklessness and not giving a damn about anything, that feeling of caution is deeply wrong. South Park is supposed to feel like too much. It is supposed to overwhelm you. 6 careful episodes a year is the opposite of everything the show was built on. The shortened seasons are maybe the clearest single symbol of how much South Park has changed. Not because 6 episodes cannot be good, they can, but because 6 episodes cannot be South Park, at least not the version of South Park that made it one of the most important shows in television history. That version of the show needed room to breathe. Room to be messy and weird and inconsistent and brilliant. Room to be 14 different things in 14 different weeks. 6 episodes does not give you that room. It gives you a highlight reel at best and an afterthought at worst. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet, even within those shrinking seasons, there have been moments where the show seemed to realize exactly what it had become. Moments where Parker and Stone looked in the mirror and wrote down what they saw. The most recent seasons of South Park are the most self-aware the show has ever been. The question is whether self-awareness counts for anything when it does not lead to change. Section 11, seasons 27 and 28. South Park knows it sucks now. In 2011, Trey Parker used Stan Marsh to tell the audience that everything looked like crap. 14 years later, in 2025, he used Stan Marsh again. But this time, the message was not hidden behind a medical diagnosis or a metaphor about cynicism. This time, it was as direct and as blunt as anything South Park has ever done. Stan Marsh, sitting with his friends, looked around and said it out loud. South Park sucks now, and it is because of all this political stuff. We are just getting totally bogged down in it. Remember when we used to do stuff? Just us guys? Ever since all this political crap took over, it is like, and then he trailed off. Because what else was there to say? That moment came in season 28, episode 2, titled The Woman in the Hat, which aired on October 29th, 2025 as a Halloween episode. But to understand why those words hit so hard, you have to start with what happened in season 27. Because season 27 was one of the strangest, most uneven stretches of South Park in the show's entire history. A season that started with a record-breaking explosion and ended with fans not even knowing the season was over. Season 27 premiered on July 23rd, 2025, with an episode called Sermon on the Mount. It was the show's first new regular episode in a long time, and it came out swinging. The episode went directly after Donald Trump, who was back in office for a second term in real life. The episode was so aggressive in its political satire that it became one of the most talked about episodes in years. It pulled record numbers. According to Variety, the second episode of the season, Got a Nut, averaged 6.2 million global multi-platform viewers across Paramount Plus and Comedy Central in its first 3 days. It posted the highest Live +3 rating on Comedy Central since 2018, and it had the biggest young adult viewership share in South Park history. The season 27 premiere scored a 9.4 rating on IMDb and was sitting at number 4 among all-time fan favorites. Those were massive numbers that the show had not seen in years. And they created a buzz around South Park that reminded people of the old days, when a new episode was an event that everybody was talking about. For a moment, it looked like the show might be surging back to life. But then, things started falling apart. The second episode, Got a Nut, ranked 72nd on IMDb among all South Park episodes. Decent, but a significant drop from the premiere. The third episode, Sycophancy, dropped all the way to 246th out of 325 total episodes at the time of its ratings, making it one of the worst reviewed episodes in the entire history of the show. The quality curve of season 27 was like falling off a cliff. The premiere was spectacular. Everything that followed was a steep decline. Sycophancy did accomplish one thing that fans had been begging for though. It finally killed Tegrity Farms. In the episode ICE raided the farm and deported Randy's workers, forcing him to shut down the marijuana business. Randy tried to save the farm by using ChatGPT and microdosing ketamine, which was about as ridiculous as it sounds, before ultimately giving up and abandoning the farm entirely. Randy put his geologist outfit back on for the first time in years, and the Marsh family moved back to town. Fans on social media went wild. Posts on X included things like South Park finally killing the Tegrity Farm storyline, and it's gone, and Randy's back in his geologist outfit and Tegrity is over. The reaction made it crystal clear just how tired people had been of the farm. The loudest cheers of the entire season came not from a joke or a plot twist, but from a storyline finally ending. But even the death of Tegrity Farms could not save season 27 from its biggest problem. The season was heavily political from start to finish. Nearly every episode revolved around Trump, his administration, and the political chaos surrounding it. For longtime fans who had been complaining for years that South Park had become too focused on politics, season 27 was more of the same. The premiere worked because it was shocking and aggressive and felt like an event. But by episode 3, the political material was already wearing thin. The show was doing exactly what every other comedy program in America was doing: making Trump jokes, week after week after week. And then came the twist that nobody saw coming. Season 27, episode 5, titled Conflict of Interest, aired as what fans assumed was just another episode in a continuing season. But when the next episode aired 2 weeks later on October 15th, 2025, it was not season 27, episode 6. It was season 28, episode 1, titled Twisted Christian. South Park had ended its 27th season and started its 28th season without telling anyone. There was no announcement, no finale, no indication that the season was over. Fans just showed up one week and discovered they were watching a different season. Season 27 had only 5 episodes. 5. That was even fewer than the 6-episode seasons that fans had already been unhappy about. And the fact that it ended without any kind of announcement or acknowledgement made it feel even worse. It felt dismissive, like the show did not even think its audience deserved to know when a season was starting or ending. Seasons 25 and 26 had at least been clearly defined as 6-episode runs. Season 27 just sort of stopped and became something else overnight. Reports later indicated that both season 27 and season 28, having just 5 episodes each, was tied to the new deal Parker and Stone had signed with Paramount Global in July 2025. That deal, valued at $1.5 billion over 5 years, outlined 50 new episodes across those 5 years and restructured how the show would be produced and distributed. The math of 50 episodes over 5 years works out to 10 episodes per year, which is where the 2 5-episode seasons came from. But whatever the business logic behind it, the result for fans was jarring. 2 half seasons crammed into 1 year, with a surprise dividing line between them that nobody was told about in advance. Season 28 premiered with Twisted Christian on October 15th, 2025, and ran for 5 episodes through November 26th. The season continued the heavily political approach of season 27, satirizing the second Trump administration, billionaire influence, and artificial intelligence, among other topics. The episode Sora Not Sorry blended AI satire with the boys' school lives. Turkey Trot dealt with local community events intersecting with the ongoing political storylines. The finale, The Crap Out, tried to tie together the season's various threads. But the episode that mattered most, the one that will likely be remembered long after the rest of season 28 is forgotten, was The Woman in the Hat. That was the episode where Stan said it. South Park sucks now. The setup was this. Stan's family is struggling because of a government shutdown. Stan's dad, Randy, has lost his job at the U.S. Geological Survey, which was the same job he had way back in the early seasons before Tegrity Farms ever existed. The family has to move into Stan's grandfather's retirement home. During all of this chaos, Stan sits with his friends and delivers the line that felt like it was coming from Trey Parker's own mouth. That South Park has gotten bad because it is all politics now. That he misses when it was just the boys doing stuff together. That the political content has taken over everything. Stan then tries to do something about it. He comes up with a plan to create a cryptocurrency meme based on the idea that South Park sucks now. The plan is to use the meme to make enough money to escape the retirement home and get things back to normal. Kyle's cousin, also named Kyle, gets involved and tries to sell the crypto scheme to Don Jr., eventually confessing that the whole thing is a scam. The plot is messy and chaotic and self-referencing in a way that only South Park can be. But what matters is not the plot. What matters is that the show looked directly at its audience and said the thing that the audience had been saying for years. South Park sucks now. Those are not my words. Those are the show's own words, spoken by the character who has always been Trey Parker's on-screen stand-in. Stan has been Parker's voice since the very beginning. When Stan is frustrated, it is because Parker is frustrated. When Stan is exhausted, it is because Parker is exhausted. And when Stan says that South Park has been ruined by politics, it is impossible to hear that as anything other than Parker himself making the same complaint. This is the second time the show has done this. You're Getting Old in 2011 was the first. Stan seeing everything as crap. Sharon complaining that the same things keep happening every week. Those were coded confessions wrapped inside a story. The Woman in the Hat did not bother with the code. It just said it directly, out in the open. The critical response to season 28 reflected the divided feelings. On Rotten Tomatoes, the season held a 31% approval rating from critics. That is remarkably low for a show that once had individual seasons scoring in the high 90s. Some reviewers praised the show's willingness to keep swinging and appreciated the surreal humor, but others felt the constant political focus had become exhausting and that the show was not offering anything new. Parker and Stone described themselves in interviews as down-the-middle guys who were mining the political material for comedy without bias, but many critics and fans felt that description no longer matched what was actually on screen. The Woman in the Hat itself received a 7.3 rating on IMDb and ranked 286th among all South Park episodes according to fan ratings at the time. That is not terrible for any random episode of television. But for an episode that was supposed to be a major moment of self-reflection, a turning point where the show acknowledged its own decline and potentially set up a course correction, 286th out of 325 is not exactly a ringing endorsement from the fan base. And that brings us to the real question about all of this self-awareness. Does it matter? There is a version of the argument where the show acknowledging its own problems is admirable, honest, brave even. Most shows that are past their prime pretend that everything is fine. They keep doing the same thing and never address the elephant in the room. South Park at least had the courage to look at itself and say, yeah, this is not working. That counts for something. Self-awareness is better than delusion. But there is another version of the argument, and it is the one that stings more. Self-awareness without change is just complaining. If you know the house is on fire and you announce that the house is on fire, but you do not pick up a fire extinguisher, what good is the announcement? Parker and Stone use Stan to say that South Park is too political and that the show was better when it focused on the boys. And then they continued making political episodes. Season 28, after The Woman in the Hat, did not suddenly pivot back to character-driven stories about kids. It kept going with the same Trump-era political satire that Stan had just finished complaining about. Some online commentators have floated an interesting theory about this, that the self-awareness is not a confession at all, that it is performance art, that Parker and Stone are deliberately making South Park worse, leaning harder into the political content that they know fans are tired of, as some kind of long game to prove a point or to fulfill their contractual obligations in the most chaotic way possible. The idea being that taking $1.5 billion and then alienating your core audience would be, in a twisted way, the most counterculture thing South Park has ever done. Whether that theory is right or not, the result is the same for fans. South Park in its most recent seasons has become a show that knows it is not what it used to be, says so out loud, and then continues to be exactly what it just said it should not be. It is self-aware decline. The most honest version of getting worse that a television show has ever produced. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And that self-awareness, that confession, that unflinching mirror held up to itself is really the final piece of the puzzle. Because once you have walked through every stage of South Park's transformation, from the explosive rise to the golden age, to the slow shift, to the burnout, to the serialization, to the Garrison trap, to the Tegrity years, to the Randy takeover, to the billion-dollar deal, to the shrinking seasons, to the show finally admitting what everyone already knew. There is only one question left. What was South Park, and what did it become? Section 12, The Legacy, what South Park was versus what it became. In 1997, two guys from Colorado who had made a Christmas card out of construction paper changed television forever. They proved that animation was not just for children. They proved that a cable channel nobody had heard of could become a cultural powerhouse overnight. They proved that comedy could be crude and smart at the same time, that you could make people laugh with a fart joke and make them think with the scene that came right after it. They created 4 characters who felt real, even though they were made of paper. 4 kids standing at a bus stop in a small mountain town, waiting for the school bus, talking about whatever was on their minds. And for millions of people around the world, watching those 4 kids became a weekly tradition that lasted for years and years and years. South Park at its best was unlike anything else on television. It was fearless in a way that no other show could match. When the Church of Scientology was untouchable in Hollywood, South Park walked up and touched it. When every other network was too scared to show the Prophet Muhammad after the Danish cartoon controversy, South Park tried to show him anyway and then called out their own network on the air for censoring them. When political correctness started dominating every conversation in American culture, South Park made fun of it before anyone else did. The show was always first, always the loudest voice in the room, always the one willing to say the thing that nobody else would say. That was not just entertainment, that was something genuinely important. In a media landscape where everybody was terrified of offending somebody, South Park stood up and offended everybody equally, and somehow that felt like the most honest thing on television. The Golden Age episodes were timeless. That is not an exaggeration. Scott Tenorman Must Die is just as shocking and funny today as it was when it aired in 2001. Casa Bonita is just as absurd and lovable. Make Love Not Warcraft is just as relatable to anyone who has ever lost a weekend to a video game. Good Times with Weapons is just as creative and unexpected. These episodes work because they are about characters, not headlines. They are about kids being kids in a world full of insane adults. You do not need to remember what was happening in the news that week to enjoy them. You do not need any context beyond the world of South Park itself. They exist outside of time. And that is the rarest thing a television show can achieve. The boys were the heart of everything. Stan was the moral center, the kid who usually ended up learning something and delivering the lesson at the end. Kyle was the conscience, the one who would fight for what he believed was right, even when it was not popular. Cartman was the chaos, the villain you could not stop watching because you never knew how far he would go. And Kenny was the wild card, the kid who barely spoke, died constantly, and somehow became one of the most beloved characters in television history, despite the audience not being able to understand half of what he said. Together, they were perfect. Not because they were good kids, they were terrible kids most of the time. But their friendships, their arguments, their adventures, their 4-way chemistry was the engine that made every great episode work. Around them was a town full of adults who were even worse. Randy Marsh, who turned every minor situation into a personal crisis. Mr. Garrison, who had no business being near children. Mr. Mackey, who said "K" after everything and never actually helped anyone. Butter's parents, who grounded him for things that were not his fault. Chef, who gave the boys advice that was wildly inappropriate but somehow always came from a good place. The genius of the show was that the adults were always wrong, and the kids were always the ones who figured things out. It was a world where the people in charge were idiots, and the people with no power were the smartest ones in the room. For anyone who has ever been a kid, that felt exactly right. Now look at what South Park became. A show where a supporting character's marijuana farm was the central storyline for 7 years. A show where the 4 boys who made it famous were pushed to the margins of their own story. A show where political commentary went from being one ingredient in a rich recipe to being the only thing on the plate. A show where the creators themselves admitted through their own characters that it had gotten bad, and then kept doing the same things they had just admitted were the problem. A show that went from 14 episodes a season to 6 and then to 5 without even telling the audience that the season had ended. A show that signed a deal worth over $1 billion and in doing so split its content across multiple platforms, fragmented its fan base, and locked itself into contractual obligations that ensured it would keep going whether the creative fire was still burning or not. The ratings tell the story as clearly as anything. During the spring of 1998, 8 of the 10 highest rated shows on all of basic cable were South Park episodes. The season 2 peak of 6.2 million viewers for a single episode set records. By the Golden Age, the show was consistently pulling 3 to 5 million viewers per episode. Season 8's Goobacks peaked at 30 million viewers, which is a number that almost no cable show could dream of reaching. The season 14 premiere in 2010 still pulled 3.7 million. By season 25 in 2022, the average had dropped to 0.65 million viewers viewers per episode, from 6.2 million to 0.65 million. That is not a gradual decline, that is a collapse. Yes, television viewing habits changed. Yes, streaming pulled audiences away from cable. Yes, every long-running show loses viewers over time. All of that is true, but none of it fully explains a drop of that size. Some of that loss is the show itself. Some of that is people walking away because the thing they loved was not the thing they were watching anymore. Season 27 in 2025 did see a dramatic spike in viewership, with episodes pulling over 6 million global multi-platform viewers across Paramount Plus and Comedy Central. But those numbers came because of the political content and the timing of Trump's second term, not because the show had returned to what made it great. The premiere was an event because of what it was about, not because of how it was made. And the quality dropped sharply after that premiere, with episodes plummeting in fan ratings by the third installment. High viewership driven by controversy is not the same as high viewership driven by love. One is a spike, the other is a foundation. And South Park's foundation had been eroding for a long time. The comparison between what South Park once dared to do and what it does now is painful. In 2005, the show took on Scientology when doing so could have gotten the creators personally investigated and the show pulled off the air. In 2006, they fought their own network over the right to show Muhammad, a battle that had real consequences and real risks. In 2001, the show aired a September 11th themed episode that was among the first comedy programs to address the attacks. These were moments where South Park did things that required actual courage, where being counterculture meant standing alone against powerful forces who could hurt you. Making fun of Donald Trump in 2025 requires no such courage. Every late night host does it, every sketch show does it, every comedian with a Netflix special does it. Every podcast, every social media account, every political commentator on every side of the debate has opinions about Trump that they share constantly. South Park adding its voice to that chorus is not counterculture, it is the culture. The show that built its reputation on going against the grain is now moving with it. The show that used to be the outsider is now part of the establishment it once mocked, and that might be the saddest part of all of this. Not the shortened seasons, not the Integrity Farms era, not the Randy Marsh takeover, not the billion-dollar deal. The saddest part is that South Park used to feel dangerous. You genuinely did not know what they were going to do next. You did not know who they were going to go after or what sacred cow they were going to slaughter. There was a thrill to watching South Park that came from the feeling that these two guys did not care about consequences. They were going to say whatever they wanted, and if the world got mad, that was the world's problem. That feeling is gone. The show is predictable now. You know what the target is going to be before the episode starts. You know the political angle. You know the formula, the surprise is gone. And without the surprise, a huge part of what made South Park matter is gone too. Parker and Stone are not bad at their jobs, that is important to say. Even in the weakest late era episodes, there are flashes of the brilliance that made them two of the most talented people in comedy. A joke will land perfectly, a character moment will ring true. A piece of satire will cut deeper than anything else on television that week. The talent is still there. The problem is not ability, the problem is direction. The problem is that two men who changed television when they were in their 20s are now approaching 60 and are locked into producing a show that they have openly, repeatedly, through their own characters, admitted they are tired of making. That is not a recipe for greatness. That is a recipe for going through the motions, and going through the motions is the one thing South Park was never supposed to do. There is a question that comes up in every conversation about South Park's decline, and it is worth addressing directly. Could the show come back? Could Parker and Stone find their way back to what made it great? The answer is theoretically yes. The tools are all still there, the characters are still there, the boys are still in 4th grade, the town is still full of insane adults. The 6-day production schedule that allows them to be the fastest show on television still works. If Parker and Stone woke up tomorrow and decided to make a season of South Park that was entirely about the boys, with the adults in supporting roles, with no political agenda driving the stories, with standalone episodes that could be watched in any order and enjoyed 20 years from now, they could do it. There is nothing stopping them except themselves. But the evidence suggests that is not going to happen. The Paramount deal guarantees more content through at least season 30. The political climate ensures there will always be an easy target to go after. The shortened seasons mean there is less room than ever for experimentation. And Parker's own admission that he relates more to the adult characters now than the kid characters means the creative pull is away from the boys, not toward them. Everything about the current setup pushes South Park further from its golden age and closer to what it has become. A show that used to be the most exciting thing on television and is now just another show on television. What South Park was, at its very best, was a show that trusted its audience to be smart enough to get the joke. It never talked down to anyone, it never played it safe, it never did what everybody expected. It took stupid, crude, offensive comedy and used it as a delivery system for some of the sharpest social commentary of its era. It proved that a cartoon about 4 kids in Colorado could be the most important show on television, and for a long time, it was. What South Park is now is a show that knows it is not that anymore. A show that can see what it used to be, can name everything that went wrong, can put those words in the mouth of its own main character, and still cannot or will not change course. It is a show in the grip of contracts and habits and creative exhaustion, kept alive not by passion, but by obligation. And every now and then, in a quiet moment between the political jokes and the Randy Marsh storylines and the 5-episode seasons, you can still catch a glimpse of what it used to be. 4 kids at a bus stop, a small town in the mountains, the feeling that anything could happen next. But that feeling is just a memory now. And memories, no matter how good they are, cannot carry a show forever. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.